I'm Asher Miller.
I'm Rob Dietz.
And I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where the endangered desert tortoises can't find a damn sunny spot with 9 million solar panels shading out their habitat.
In today's episode, we're exploring the Harry Potteresque dream at the heart of the Green New Deal. Solar panels and other modern energy technologies can be really useful, but the belief that we can technologize our way to a bigger and better society, powered by clean energy, is tragically flawed. Come along with us as we dig into the up and down story of Ivanpah, and as we explore how to make real progress on energy and sustainability.
Hey Jason, hey Asher.
Good to see you.
Hello.
I would really like to reduce your anxiety today.
Fine,
That's
you.
my goal.
Please.
That's my goal with this episode. So
Got pills.
I will not drug you, but I'm going to take you back in time to the year 2018.
Oh, you're right. I was so less anxious at that point.
It was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, Donald Trump was making some messes in America, but nothing like what's happening today, right?
It's true. There's been
Those
an
are the good old
exponential
days.
function that's occurred.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is
Kicked in
good old
since
days.
then.
You're right,
So,
2018.
2018,
Yeah.
I'm flying through the air on an airplane.
Nice.
So you're God.
Demi.
As a god, sure.
Yeah.
The reason was my, at the time, future wife was living in Arizona, and I was living right here in Corvallis with you two clowns recording this very podcast and whatever the hell else we do at Post Carbon Institute.
This episode? I don't recall this. We
But-
recorded
but
this very episode?
We started our podcast back then, I
Yeah, it
think.
was right around the start of our podcast. So I'm flying to see her, and the flight is from Eugene, Oregon to Mesa, Arizona. So you got to kind of get out of our little green world and fly across the desert. And I always get a window seat.
Me too.
Like I love,
Not me, aisle baby.
I love looking out
Is
the
there
window.
anyone who's like, I always get a middle seat?
No.
I prefer the middle seat. I want to be in the middle seat in the row next to the toilets where you can't lean your seat back.
Yeah.
You're pretty much a psychopath if you request the middle seat.
I think that seat's always available to you.
I think it's a masochist is what you are, not a psychopath.
Well, rather than spacing out to a podcast like this or whatever, I like to look out the window and check out the landscape. And so I'm flying there, and at one point over the beige, dusty, sandy desert landscape, something just blew my mind. It was this massive bright light. I'm like, what the hell is that?
UFO.
Seriously, I was like a moth to the flame. I'm like staring at this like, is this going to damage my eyes?
Yeah.
What is that? And on the ground around it was this like geometric pattern. I was really kind of like
Mystified.
I kind of thought, I think that has something to do with solar, but I really don't know. So when I hit the ground, I decided not to visit my wife. I went to the Google Earth instead.
Yeah.
You got in a rental car and drove all the way back?
Straight back, yeah. No, I as you know, I'm a map guy. I love Google Earth. I love looking at things. And so I found what it was. And it's a place called the Ivanpah Solar Generating Facility. And it's a concentrated solar panel facility.
Yeah.
Not actually saying that right. It's not a solar panel facility. It's a solar mirror facility.
Yes, big mirrors.
So you have this tower, and that's what I was seeing, this gleaming light at the top of the tower, and you have just hundreds of thousands of mirrors.
So this was the Eye of Sauron that you were seeing, actually, now that we think about it.
Yeah, I didn't
It's
put that
incredible.
together, but it's quite
No,
similar.
I've seen it. It's spectacular. I had the same experience you had.
Yeah, and so...
I guess I need to fly to Arizona.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll go with you. Window seat.
Okay.
Well, for the listeners, you've got hundreds of thousands of mirrors on these heliostats. that
So let's stop
track
for
the
1
sun.
second.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Not hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, lots
Okay.
and lots and lots.
That's
And,
like almost hard to imagine.
you know, they turn to make the mirror reflect the sun straight at this tower. There's a generator up there. You got water in it. You turn it to steam, and then it
because
creates
just the
electricity.
heat, it's concentrated heat.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there's other kinds of solar power plants out there too. You can see photovoltaic cells like the types we'd have on our roof.
Yeah.
They're just like sprawled out over the ground
Yeah.
for acres
I've seen plenty
and
of those,
acres.
yeah.
Yeah. Or
I mean, they're-
hectares and hectares if you're an Australian.
Yeah, there's real millions of these panels, like 9 million panels. So I've since come back and explored this area on Google Earth every once in a while because I want to.
He wants to move there. I think this is what's going on.
I
You're
think
looking for housing?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, you have this Ivanpah facility, this solar thermal generating plant. You got those other panels I talked about. But then you got this huge golf course.
Right there.
Right there.
Everything you could possibly ask for.
This is
in the desert, a golf course in the desert.
Yeah, this is the Prim Valley in the Mojave Desert. You also have outlet shopping. You got 2 high-rise casinos on either side.
Wait, so there must be a road that goes.
So we're in Nevada.
through
We're in Nevada.
Well, yeah, it's Nevada, right at the California borderline. So the Ivanpah.
So this is the road between Los Angeles and Vegas.
Yeah, this is Interstate 15.
Okay.
So big
Got it. Okay.
highway. The best part is the 2 casinos are on either side of the highway, and a monorail connects them. It's like one of the most crazy town places there is on
We
Earth.
should go.
I wish we had money for road trips. Excuse me, fans of Crazy Town. If you want to sponsor our road trip for the Crazy Townies, please write a check, as Cher will accept
Maybe we
it.
should do a caravan.
Think about it. Instead of me just rooting around on Google Earth, we could be on the ground in these places. We could be...
We could be climbing the tower and getting
We get
fried.
fried. Exactly.
We don't even need to ask listeners for funding. We could just go to the casinos. We'll take the monorail.
Oh, good idea. Just, send us like enough to start, like, so we can ante up.
Like $100.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
we can make can make it.
So I'm going to take you guys a little farther back in time to an even more hopeful era, okay? This is an era of wonder and eco-modernist dreams.
Oh.
The date is October 27th, 2010.
Oh.
The setting is this same Prim Valley, the vast and hot Mojave Desert, interior Southern California, very close to the Nevada border. A big bunch of people met here, these mucky muck big men meeting up in the
Were they all
desert.
tall?
Ribbon cutting kind of thing.
You had President Obama's Secretary of the Interior, a guy named Ken Salazar. He had his big white cowboy hat on.
Awesome.
You had the Vice President of Bright Source Energy.
Good name.
What a great name.
Very, very optimistic. Yep.
Yeah.
That VP, he unveiled a commemorative plaque to mark the occasion. And then you had the biggest of the big men. You had the California governor and former Hollywood A-lister, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
He was still the
literally the
governor
biggest.
back then.
Yeah.
He was there. He was the governor for a long time.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, so you had these guys in the desert. You also had a lot of money in the desert. So NRG Energy, that's the letter N, the letter R, the letter G.
That's a great name.
Wait, that's like redundant.
It is a little redundant.
Energy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Energy.
They were set to invest $300 million.
Okay.
The U.S. Department of Energy supplied a loan guarantee for $1.6 billion.
Nice.
Okay.
So you had all these men and money in the desert to do the groundbreaking on Ivanpah.
It sounds like a lot of money, a lot of responsible people, all for a good cause. What could go wrong?
So wait a second. So was the golf course there at the time, you think? They just came over from the golf course? They just picked a spot in the desert?
Pretty sure the golf course was always there. That's just natural habitat.
Right, of course.
It's an oasis that we just golf on.
Right.
Yeah.
Just naturally formed.
Springs bubbling up and
With
lawns,
holes, just holes perfectly placed.
Now, you guys know me. I couldn't not do an Arnold speech here.
You're only sharing this story so you can get to the Arnold.
Yeah.
So
lay it on us. Go ahead.
So here's what he
Arnold.
said. He said, solar plans like this are making our goals become a reality by 2020. Some people look at the desert and see miles and miles of emptiness. I look at it and see miles and miles of a gold mine. Get to the chopper! So at the time, Ivanpah was the most ambitious, the highest profile solar project in the entire world.
Really?
So a little bit about it. It was supposed to produce enough electricity to power about 100,000 homes. It was supposed to reduce carbon emissions, and it was really launched with fanfare, celebrated in the media and policy circles to be this like kind of beacon of tech innovation.
A literal
right?
beacon. Yeah. A beacon of light. Yeah.
This is what gets me is this juxtaposition of this supposedly green stuff with obviously an absurd golf course, outlet malls, and casinos with a freeway running by it.
Right.
And the idea, though, was that California Electricity Utility was supposed to buy power from Ivanpah through the year 2039. And here's why we're kind of talking about this. It was announced earlier this year that electricity purchases from 2 of 3 units at Ivanpah are being terminated. Terminated, get it? There's another, you got that? Terminator. And that means the plant is going to start shutting down next year, which is obviously way ahead of its 2039 due date.
Ugh.
Ah, sadness. Well, can we talk about what went wrong? I mean, Arnold drove all the way out there. Dude's probably pissed, right? He wasted a day doing this or whatever. So 15 years, right? It goes kaput in 15 years. So let's talk about what were some of the reasons why this didn't actually pan out, right? There's some environmental issues, obviously, and then there's the economics. So can you guess which one was really the issue?
It could have had something to do with money, but
we'll
just a guess.
get to that. Let's talk about some of the environmental stuff, right? So one of the things that is ironic, I guess you could say, about Ivanpah, they decided, now newer generations of these concentrated solar power systems, they use other forms of energy storage, right? So one of the appeals of this kind of technology was that you could store this energy over time, when the sun's not shining. Right? This is a major issue with renewable energies. You have to be able to store energy for when demand is not there or the sun's not shining, wind's not blowing, whatever, right? So, but they decided they were going to use water. But water, we've talked about this. We talked about inertia and entropy and, so there's a lot of like loss of heat, from water, and temperatures would cool in the desert,
real cool at night.
Get cold at night. The water would cool. So in the mornings, they would have to like power up the turbines with natural gas.
Get things moving.
To get things going, right? So it's just maybe you could call it an analog in some ways for a lot of the renewable energy reality we have right now, which is how much it's still dependent upon fossil fuels.
And I think that, so they use molten salt now is what they use. And I think even these, like they need to have a certain temperature. The molten salt needs to be a certain temperature to flow correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And they often, even in the molten salt ones, I believe still have to preheat the salt often to keep it running in the night. So none of these are actually truly off of fossil fuels.
It's good when your renewable solar power requires natural gas.
And then you're still running a turbine, like a traditional turbine, which again itself requires a whole lot of moving parts and monitoring and connecting to the grid to make sure it's synchronized with the AC. Like none of this is easy to do.
Well, your point of share though about, we're creating CO2 emissions off a power plant that's supposed to do away with CO2 emissions. That's great. I want to hit another environmental piece, which is the concept that the desert is not a wasteland. It's not emptiness, as Arnold's talking about. It's not miles and miles of a gold mine. We have trouble living in the desert. It's hot, it's dry, and a lot of water. But there are other life forms that are quite well adapted to living
courses.
there.
Yeah.
Well, one of them is the desert tortoise, as an example, does quite well in that habitat. But of course, now it's endangered because of all the habitat degradation that people have caused over the years. And when Ivanpah was getting built, construction on Unit 2 and Unit 3 had to be halted because more tortoises were being killed than was legally allowed. And of course,
you just had to slow down so that they could keep the killing within a certain quota.
That's it. I mean, despite all the protests from your silly little conservation groups that care about silly little tortoises, the Department of the Interior, which should be the one, Fish and Wildlife Service is the one that should be working to protect tortoises, and the whole department fast-tracked the building of Ivanpah, keep those bulldozers rolling.
Well, because it's progress, and these people are building this are pro-environment. Obviously, they've got the golf course, they got the mall, they got the casino, and they've got this plant coming in to run it all and to save human civilization.
The top of the tower does not generate anywhere near as much steam as is blowing off of your head right now every time you mention golf course and outlet mall.
Can I be serious for a second? You get the instinct, right? Yeah. The instinct here is we're going to approve things, and we've been doing this. We're going to approve renewable energy projects because they...
Approve things, you said. Okay.
Yeah. What did I say?
I thought you said prove, but you're going to approve.
Approve things.
Okay.
Because the promise here is that they're going to help reduce carbon emissions.
You're going to break a few eggshells to make your omelet, but you got to make
tortoise shells, not eggshells.
Oh, that's right. Tortoise shells. Okay, so like you're saying, this habitat is really interesting. In fact, I've been to Mojave Desert a number of times. Mojave Desert also sits kind of at the edge of the Great Basin, which is an incredibly important place for bird migration. And a lot of creatures migrate through the Great Basin, these birds requiring like these salt lakes. The salt lakes have these shrimp, and they fatten up, and they can then move between sort of the subtropics and the temperate zone. So tons of wildlife absolutely rely on this, bird life.
That's going away. Like the Great Salt Lake,
No, the Great Salt Lake is so important. It's just tragic. It's like half the birds that move around in the Great Basin or something like rely on the Great Salt Lake. It's such a big lake compared to the others.
Yeah.
So there's incredible flight zones through here. And the problem is you're a bird and you're flying high, and you see this like, reflective surfaces, looks like a lake, right? Yeah. But it's not. It's these like mirrors.
Yeah.
And you swoop down to investigate, and birds was not uncommon for them to just combust as they fly through the concentrated solar zone. It's like crazy. I mean, I was a kid.
Heat. Yeah.
Remember, did you ever play with like...
Are you talking, you're going to share stories with us to prove that you're a psychopath because you're burning
remember as
ants
a kid,
or something?
Yeah, as a kid with a magnifying glass. Yeah, I did. I mostly did wood and leaves and try to start fires. But you would hit an ant once in a while.
I'm going to tell you how stupid I am. I tried it on my leg once.
Is that why you're still limping?
It seriously set my jeans on fire. I was like, oh, shit.
At least you had jeans on. I'm like, I had bare skin imaginations. But yeah, you could burn a hole in your jean and stuff.
Oh, it lit like a white hot flame burst off my. So that's what's happening to these birds. They're like a white hot flame, and they just smolder to the ground.
They do. They're called streakers, and about 6. Is it streakers?
I think streamers.
Streakers, what you did in college.
Not what I did. That's what you did.
No. Streamers. And there was apparently around 6,000 birds a year die because of this.
Yeah.
So anyway.
One thing I will give Donald Trump credit for is he's very concerned about the birds with renewable energy. So constantly talking about the birds dying.
Yes. The wind turbines and all that stuff.
And all that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, maybe we can get in the cabinet now. Jason can be his head of the Department of Streaming.
Right. Oh, well, let's get to the real reason why Ivanpah didn't work, right? The economic problems.
Yeah, money.
Yeah, it always comes down to money. And the big driver of this, honestly, was the fact that solar photovoltaics, the solar panels that we know and love, the cost of them has come down so precipitously. By 2020, they were delivering electricity at roughly 1/3 the cost per megawatt hour compared to these concentrated solar power facilities.
That's
incredible. Just way cheaper, right? And you were talking, Rob, about that area. You go and Google Earth and you look at Ivanpah, and then you zoom out and you quickly see these enormous fields of these solar panels, you know, like I think one of them you mentioned was like 9 million solar panels all put together. 9 million. So that I think really is what did Ivanpah in, was actually not being able to compete with other forms of renewable energy production.
Yeah. Well, and to get at the expense side of things too, remember when politicians talk about Green New Deal, they want to talk about the renewable energy, but also the jobs and, all these great jobs that are going to be created. And that didn't really pan out for Ivanpah either. There were about 1,000 temporary construction jobs, like all that technical wizardry you were talking about, Jason. They had to make that. They had to put it all together. So, you had 1,000 people employed for a time. But then after that, there were about 60 people full-time that worked at the power plant. And remember, we said the total federal loan guarantee for that project was $1.6 billion. So if you do a little simple division, the cost for permanent job works out to more than $26 million per job.
Per job.
Like, I want that job.
Yeah.
Can you pay me $26 million to adjust some heliostats? Or, I mean, how many teachers could you hire?
Or podcasters.
Yeah, for $26 million.
Here's what always gets me is, obviously now you have what's called a stranded asset.
15 years later, basically.
And it's hundred thousands of giant mirrors with heliostats and all the copper wires and these giant towers with these huge turbines. There's concrete, steel. The towers are 450 feet tall.
A lot of steel.
Lots of steel. 7,500 tons of steel. 1,200 miles of cabling, 36,000 cubic yards of concrete.
Wow.
What's going to happen to this? Where's it going to go? Right?
Okay, I got two solutions for you, right?
Okay.
One is think about all the jobs that will be created, setting people to go there and just like unscrewing everything.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Disassemble.
I mean, this is the vision, I think, of the Trump administration bringing jobs back to America, right?
Yeah.
But just going and unscrewing things. You
Yeah.
know?
It's taking things apart.
Yeah. You know, and I mean, the other thing is when Mad Max happens,
Unscrew.
when Mad Max happens, it'll be, you know, all this stuff will be repurposed, you know, for
whatever.
for
We
those
don't
guys.
even know.
Yeah.
We Romanian people have had our fair share of crazy autocratic leaders, from Vlad the Impaler to Nicolae Ceausescu. So we see America and think, oh God, leaders want many babies and make economy go crash same time. This very bad.
I don't think we can do this.
Keep going, keep going.
When this happened to us, we thankful America adopt many babies in 1990s. Now time we return favor. If you afraid what RFK Jr. Trump and sycophantic Congress doing and want to protect your baby, then send to Romania. Many villages here are underpopulated and need strong young people for farm chores. Call 1-800-ROMANIA and speak to a specialist at Romania Adopts. That's 1-800-ROMANIA. Romania Adopts. We want American babies now.
Okay, that was a great story, Rob. I love laughing about the absurdity of golf courses in the desert and all that stuff. But why are we even talking about this Ivanpah place? I mean, sure, the project sucked donkey balls, but they just bet on the wrong.
It's burro
Burro
balls.
balls.
Burros are what inhabit the Mojave.
Yeah, that's true.
okay.
Sorry, not donkeys. Sorry, but look, they just bet on the wrong technology. I mean, we were saying they got their asses kicked by solar PV. It's growing like mad. Like,
Yeah.
this is let me be an optimist for a change. Okay,
You're going to make a few mistakes along the way, but overall, things progress.
right. This is all part of learning as we go, trial and error as
Sure.
we make this energy transition. So I'm going to be an optimist, all right? Let me talk about all the positive things that are happening with this energy transition. So according to Ember, which is an energy think tank, last year, the world hit a milestone, okay? 40% of global electricity generation came from quote-unquote clean energy sources, all right?
Wow.
Okay, so that includes hydro and nuclear energy, but there was a 29% increase in solar power production in 1 year, okay? So solar generation, it's doubled over the last 3 years, and it's now the largest source of new electricity generation for the third year in a row, okay? And it's
Right.
expected that this year probably renewables will surpass coal as the largest source of electricity generation.
Well,
Okay?
that was inspirational to share, and your optimism is going to last about a minute, right? That was your minute. And now I'm going to mess with your brain and destroy the optimism.
Thanks, great.
Because even as this electricity production, like you're saying, is great, renewables, blah, 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 but fossil fuels use, even for electricity production, is also growing. And so forget about this record rise in solar PV that Enver points out. Total electricity demand is also growing at like 4% a year in 2024. And that led to fossil fuel use increasing for electricity production by 1.4%. And global power sector emissions are rising. They rose by 1.6% to set an all-time new high for CO2 emissions from the power sector. And a lot of this, of course, is driven by an increase in air conditioning demand thanks to record-setting temperatures.
Awesome.
So fuck your optimism.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
That's great. I want to note with your air conditioning is causing an increase in electricity demand. It reminds me of our old episode number 45 on positive feedback loops.
We talked about air conditioning then because of that feedback loop of higher temperatures leading to more demand in air conditioning, leading to more demand in energy consumption, leading to more use of fossil fuels in this case, right?
Yeah. So check out that episode. That's episode 45. We also did episode 60 on air conditioning itself.
Oh, right.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to throw some even more cold water on your overheating solar panels this year. It's important to keep in mind that electricity production actually only represents 21% of final energy consumption. And this is what drives me crazy about like the eco-modernism stuff. And so even if all electricity came from renewable sources, that 21% is half of the share of final energy consumption that came from oil products. So we have over 80% of our primary energy consumption in the world is still coming from fossil fuels. And even though the percentage might be going down, the total amount is growing as we talked about.
Right.
And so I'm sorry to beat up on you, but you were representing like this way of thinking that drives me bonkers. And so I don't want you to take it personally.
It's too late. But look, it's true. I think that's something that few people understand. The electricity part of the energy puzzle is really the easiest part to solve. And I think that's part of why it gets the most attention.
Right. Low-hanging fruit.
It's getting, a lot of investment in it, a lot of technological focus in terms of improvement. It's something that people can engage in, that and electric vehicles. I mean, you could see why those get a lot of the attention for people. But as you said, like a lot of our energy consumption comes in forms that's a lot more challenging to transition or to substitute, right? I mean, if you think about flying a jumbo jet, 747 across the ocean, trying to do that with...
It requires one PV panel on the top of the plane, right?
No, it's the wings. Oh. They just put them on the wings.
Yeah.
Wings made of solar panels.
And the problem is that the plane has to keep turning a little bit.
To match the sun?
Yeah.
You're flying like sideways sometimes to sunset?
Sometimes, yeah.
You just add heliostats on top of the plane.
Okay. And what our roads
Air travel's a little tough.
Yeah.
Our roads are made from bitumen and...
Yeah, the bottom of the barrel, literally.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, It's a big issue.
The steel that goes into almost everything is use high heat components. They use natural gas to keep things going 24/7 because they don't want the kilns to get cold. I mean, we can go on and on about this, and I'm sure Post Carbon Institute has.
Yeah, well, we wrote a book about those challenges. God, it's been a while, but it's called Our Renewable Future. In that, we were kind of the assignment that we had, and we worked with the authors of it are Richard Heinberg, who's our colleague at PCI, and one of our advisors, David Fridley, who works at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. And they really looked at the energy transition question. They said, okay, if our goal is 100% renewable energy, which it should be our goal, fossil fuels are not only ruinous for climate and have other environmental impacts and health impacts on people, they're finite and they're depleting, right? So at some point, we're going to have to transition away from them. And in any case, so if that's our goal, in that book project, we sort of looked at the demand side of the equation. How are we using energy? And do we need to change how we use energy? Do we need to change like how we grow food and those kinds of things?
A more efficient casino lever for the slot machines,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Well, AI will do you don't need a lever anymore.
Nobody has pulled a lever for a slot machine in forever. It's all push button, and pretty soon it's going to be a neural link.
Yeah, it's not even fun. The lever pulling was the only fun part.
Well, it's the only form of exercise a lot of people were getting, right?
You do curls with your left hand with the gin and tonic, and then your right hand is a pull down. That's how you get your exercise.
This is incredibly maddening, right? I mean, you guys are sitting here talking about how hard it's going to be to substitute our current level of consumption of fossil fuels, but we're still growing demand. There literally is no energy transition happening right now. You got all of these fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. They all grew in 2024. The only time they didn't grow recently was the downturn from the pandemic.
I know. I got excited for a while.
Yeah. There's a historian named Jean-Baptiste Frézoz he's got a recent book called More and More and More, an all-consuming history of energy, okay?
Yeah.
It's aptly titled More and More and More and More. He talks about how we're not doing the job when it comes to making an actual transition. And to give the probably the craziest example, let's talk about wood, okay?
Yeah.
Using wood for energy.
No one does that anymore.
Well, so that's the conventional wisdom, right? Is that the Industrial Revolution happened, coal comes along, we don't need to burn wood in furnaces anymore to run anything. But that is not the case at all. Wood still accounts for about 7% of total energy use in the world. Recently, Frézoz was on our buddy Rachel Donald's podcast, Planet Critical, and they brought up this amazing story about the Drax power station. That's an ominous name, and it probably should be an ominous name. This power station sits in the farmland to the east of Leeds in England, the UK.
Okay.
When it was originally constructed, it was a coal-fired power plant, but they wanted to green it up. So this is the UK's largest power station, provides 5% of the electricity to the UK.
Oh, my God.
And in the year 2000, it was converted to biomass. You guys know what biomass is?
Wood.
Yeah, wood. It's wood chips, mostly imported from the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, great.
Oh, nice.
So, you know,
Are they burning the wood chips in the ships as they're transporting the wood?
Yeah.
To get it started, yeah, of course. Yeah, it's sort of like doing natural gas at Ivanpah. You start burning the chips ahead of time. So, I mean, this power plant is touted as, quote, providing the most renewable power of any single location in the UK, right? And it's also, of course, the single biggest emitter of CO2 in the UK. But they don't count it on the nation's carbon budget because it's renewable. So, you know, don't worry about that.
Got it. Well, okay. Now, here's also what's been getting to me lately. A lot of things have, but I've been really reading up on the forecast for AI growth, and it's eye-watering. It's staggering how much electricity is expected. In fact, you know, projected, demanded, planned for right now. The electricity needed to run advanced, larger, or energy hogging data centers. We're talking public plus private investments on the order of the low trillions of dollars are desired, like project out the next 3 or 4 years. I don't even know if this is possible, but they don't seem to care what form it takes, right? It's like how fast, because we're in this arms race with AI, apparently, with China, et cetera.
The other thing I would say about this, I guess I just want to reiterate this point that you were making, Rob, which I think is not well understood and certainly not part of the discussion within the circles that we inhabit very much. And that is, as we're seeing positive signs, for example, with solar PVs, right? We're seeing exponential growth in that, which I would say is, in general terms, a good thing. We are not having a conversation about the fact that demand overall is continuing to grow. So you said there isn't an energy substitution. There is no energy transition happening, right? And I think a lot of people would bristle at that because they're hearing stories of like what I shared, you know, this exponential growth in solar. Prices have come way down, you know, we're seeing more EVs on the roads or whatever. It's like people are seeing these as positive signs, and they obviously want hope, you know, for us to be addressing the climate crisis and this energy transition to happen. But it's done not in this context where we're not looking at the overall system at all.
People don't know the scale. Yeah. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect lead into some takeaways on the closure of Ivanpah and what does it mean? What does it portend? And one of them is right in line with what you're saying, Asher. It's that there's nuance when it comes to renewable energy. You know, the three of us are not like deniers. You know, we're not sitting here saying don't do any solar projects, but we're also not putting our hands over our eyes and ears and saying we're not boosters either. You know, you have to look at the build out of a solar power plant in the context of the entire energy picture. And again, what you're saying, like, what is it used for? Is it used for another AI data center so that anybody around can ask it to draw whatever stupid picture they want it to draw? Or,
make a better cat video.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
I find myself, and I think PCI finds itself sometimes, and I'd be curious about our listeners, like where they fall in this. It's sometimes people fall into these camps, and I'm not talking about the camp that are deniers, you know, of climate change as an issue. And I'm not talking about the camp of people who are like just basically anti-renewables. I mean, we're seeing our U.S. federal government now basically going after every investment in alternative sources of energy. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people who kind of see that there is a problem here with the energy picture. Mm-hmm. And it feels like there's, within that group of people, there's a group that is caught up in this idea that this transition is happening. Right. Prices are coming down. This is accelerating. We need to basically support this transition to happen. We can have this sort of bright green future where we're all driving electric cars, you know, and we've got solar panels everywhere, blah, blah, blah. You know, we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about Ezra Klein and you know, sort of the abundance agenda. And then we happen to know people, I think it's a much smaller population of people, but people who are not climate deniers, but they're more, I would say, energy literate or energy aware. Mm-hmm. And because they see these limitations, they understand like the scale of the problem, and that, you know, we're just adding renewable energy onto fossil fuels, or they recognize how many inputs. This is something we haven't really talked very much about.
Yeah.
You know, is like all of these things. You're talking about data centers.
Yes.
We could talk about electric vehicles. We could even just talk about what goes into the construction of solar PV panels. There are non-renewable resources that go into these things and that are being harvested right now through the use of non-renewable energy.
And they're not built really to last for decades and decades. Right. They're not easy to repair. They're not easy to recycle. Like, it's all Ivanpah-ish to me. Like, none of it is
on some level.
At some level, it's not. It's set up to be a stranded asset.
Which I want to get to that in a second. But I feel like there are those people that because they see what feels to them as energy blindness coming from the pro-renewable space, they sometimes sort of dismiss it out of hand. You know, they become almost anti-renewable.
Right. We've sat here and said Ivanpah was a disaster, and you can find sort of lefty, greeny types who would then take that and say, yeah, never build out something like that. Don't have these solar facilities. And I think you're saying that's not necessarily the case either.
There is nuance in this, which is that the future is going to be renewable. You know, the question is, what do we use it for and how is it done? And that's another piece of Ivanpah that I want to talk about, which is things like that. Even if it's improved technology, when we're doing things at these enormous scales, you know, we're locking ourselves into a lot of the mindset and the approach from the current system or the current way we do modernity that I think is really unsustainable, right? We're talking about efficiency, right? Well, it's much more efficient to have these big plants, but there's so much complexity to these systems and all the specialization that goes into it. And then of course there's the profit seeking, right? So it's like
piles and piles of gold mines.
Right. People who are investing in this are looking for a return on investment, you know, like lots of capital flowing into this stuff. And what it does is reinforce this idea that we have to do everything at super large scale.
Right.
We've got to use the market, the free market, to incentivize these kinds of investments. It's more efficient. There has to be a profit motive in it. And there's also the psychology thing, which is that we're going to trust other people to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a huge part of the challenge here when we rely on whether it's something like this or it's another large. It's a wind farm out in the Dakotas or in Texas, or these huge solar, farms in the desert of Nevada,
I think that, unless we downscale our demand by at least an order of magnitude, then none of this is going to make any difference. And as soon as we did that and we got into more of it like a small distributed, more simple repairable, less complex systems, then maybe we're talking. And that bums me out is that there's all these brilliant minds. I'm sure the people that helped to build and design Ivanpah were super geniuses and they were incredible engineers.
I like how you guys can't remember the name of this place. You call it Ivanhoe, you call it Ivanpah. It's Ivanpah.
No, I said Ivanpah, but you didn't understand me because you weren't listening carefully.
It only lasted 15 years, so why do we have to remember?
It doesn't matter. Okay?
This guy Ivan that we used to know in the desert, he's no longer there.
It's Ivan another ghost town.
Okay, so Ivan the Terrible, that is a great example of a classic failure. But anyway, I think we're going to be constrained by the laws of physics in a lot of these situations. And we have beautiful, wonderful minds out there that are running up against this, like cellulosic ethanol or the hydrogen stuff that I could tell was a boondoggle. And people are getting their PhDs and getting hired by billion-dollar engineering firms, and it's a waste of talent. And instead, if we were to say, how do we downscale everything and make it repairable and lasting and live good lives without needing all this stuff?
It's if you pose to all of us the question of, we have these limits, we have these realities, these constraints on us, or these certain values that we want to apply. And you put that problem to people and you say, what role can technology play? Or what is the best form of technology that we can apply? How creative can we get? How skilled can we be in problem solving in that context, right? The problem is, as you were just saying, the incentives are not for that. The incentives, who's hiring people to do this work, who's paying them, who's investing in this stuff? It's people that want the current system to continue, right?
There's no profit in it. Like, I think if we could switch from the idea of like, it is not profitable to survive, but we should think about survival.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should be doing.
Well, if we're talking about continuing to run the current system as is, we've got a serious problem, right? Like, even if you could magically pull off this energy transition, like let's say we went all solar and wind, got rid of all the coal and oil, I guess, except for the little bit that we needed to fire up our solar power plant or whatever.
Okay, so you're trying to put me in like fairyland, miracle landscape.
Exactly.
Okay.
Even if we did that, we don't solve humanity's overshoot crisis.
No, that would be the worst thing.
Yeah, the biodiversity crisis, for example, that's linked to habitat fragmentation and loss. That's about ag expansion. That's about overhunting, pollution, industrial development.
Yeah, novel entities in the environment.
Yeah, you're not solving any of that.
No.
Not to mention the footprints of these renewable energy systems. I mean, the Brookings Institute did this study, and they reported that solar and wind generation requires 10 times more land per unit of electricity generated than coal or natural gas power plants. 10 times.
Yeah.
So, how are we supposed to be sustainable if we're going to keep growing demand and keep growing these electricity generating facilities?
I want to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet, but I think is really key in all of this. And we mentioned briefly all the resources that have to go into these renewable energy systems or electric vehicles or whatever that's part of this energy transition. But there's a human and environmental cost that comes from trying to source these, what are now called critical minerals or transition minerals.
Right.
And it's having a devastating effect. It's a continuation on some level of this sort of colonial mindset. You were joking about Schwarzenegger talking about a gold mine.
Right.
It's like this idea that we go off into these places to find these resources. Now suddenly cobalt and deuterium or whatever these
lithium,
adamantium.
These resources become
unobtainium,
become hugely valuable, right? And there's like a new gold rush looking for them, but happens to be that a lot of that is on land that is being stewarded by indigenous peoples in the global south in places, and those communities are being devastated by us, seeking to mine all that stuff.
I mean, Butte, Montana, right?
Yeah.
We're making Butte, Montanas all over the world right now. And that's just terrifying. I've been to places that were
Sorry to all of our listeners in Butte. We still really appreciate you listening.
Well, if people don't know, there's an incredible toxic legacy there of mine tailings and toxic water.
Huge pit that's as big as the entire city right on its outskirts.
That's from historic mining. But what we're projecting to do now is orders of magnitude more than we've done historically. I mean, it may not be possible. If you listen to Simon Michaud, he says it's just not going to happen. It's obscene what we're thinking about doing.
The biggest takeaway for me of this entire sordid story of Ivanpah is that all of these Green New Deal tech solutions, they can only possibly work within a limits to growth framework. You cannot have a continuous build out of any kind of powering of society without recognizing their limits and operating that way.
Yeah, and I think it's key to recognize that we are not saying no, like we shouldn't do solar and wind and renewable energy. Let's do fossil fuels instead. We are not saying that.
No, we're not saying that.
No.
We're saying this has to be done at the appropriate
scale.
What
we're saying is don't do either solar or fossil fuels. Do magic fairy dust, right?
Oh.
Great.
I love that.
All right, let's talk for a bit about what we can do differently, maybe even what listeners can do in their lives to maybe not repeat the mistakes of an Ivanpah. One of the things that I want to discuss is home solar, right? Jason, we're at the farm in your beautiful farmhouse. We're we're just sitting under a roof that's just plastered over with solar panels. You got like a 9 kilowatt
Oh, do you
system?
have the Tesla shingles?
No,
panels?
no,
I don't think that.
No, Elon Musk is actually sitting up there like Fiddler on the roof right now,
really?
creating energy.
Ranting about weird
Yeah.
shit.
You
So,
got
yeah,
like 9
9.
kilowatts of solar panel. That's pretty big. I have a 7.25 kilowatt system at home.
Panel envy.
Yeah. I've got 23 panels on my roof. So just so people know, that produces about 8.5 megawatt hours per year, which covers all the electricity that my family uses at our house. And it was pretty cheap in the end, or will be cheap, with all the incentives and Green New Deal kind of stuff.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I get the cost of these things has plummeted, obviously. Amazing story. It's what everyone like hangs their hat on, like, we've solved it. We're going to be okay.
Right.
Okay. We've explained why it's really not this answer. And also, here's what I want to add. I want to say about this. The way the solar panels are made is still very much rooted in this industrial, world that is highly polluting and not really thinking about the future. Conservation is still your best bet. I've just started air drying stuff again because we're in the summer weather. The photovoltaic what is it called? Is it the photovoltaic effect?
Photoelectric effect.
The
I think you're
photoelectric
looking
effect.
for.
It's an amazing thing we've discovered, and it actually could be used, I think, even in a very downscaled way.
And you're talking about the direct conversion of sunlight into flowing electricity.
Yeah, not just photons being able to be converted to electricity, and sunlight being the best version we know of. So anyhow, there's an amazing guy, Chris Decker, talking about a brilliant mind that is thinking about these things, right? He wrote an article in Resilience called How to Build a Low-Tech Solar Panel. And he described an alternative to the highly complex manufacturing we do of silicon-based PV using something that was discovered in the early 20th century. This is old metallurgy techniques using zinc and antimony. And these things could last many decades, and it's also easy to recycle, doesn't have the plastic laminates and all the stuff that makes the current PVs almost impossible to recycle. So that's what I'm thinking about is like, I could imagine a future downscale that still had some of the advantages we could potentially have with all of the knowledge. If we didn't waste it on this stuff.
Again, like we said before, it's about conservation first, downscaling, and then power what's actually needed.
There was that whole thing of those 3 R's. You remember that? That's kind of hokey.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah,
I know.
Maybe that actually is applicable.
We should bring that back.
Think about it. So reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not really happening very much with these solar systems, right?
The capitalists would say, and don't forget, shut the fuck up.
Right. Yeah. So we're talking about home solar PV. There are other things that you could do in your home, obviously. I mean, we're talking about conservation, efficiency, looking at, we actually just had a home audit done at our house, trying to figure out where we're wasting energy the most, what's the least efficient stuff we're doing. So that would almost be the first place to start before you even got like a solar PV system. Now, there are people who can't do that, right? They rent, they're not in a situation to do it, or they're like me, they live in trees, they can't. But there are other ways you can be engaged in things at the community scale. And one of the things I think that we're talking about, in contrast to Ivanpah or some of these other large renewable energy endeavors, is doing these things at a distributed level at a smaller scale. And so there are lots of interesting examples of communities doing this, local solar co-op utilities, for example. And there are many different ways that people are doing that. There's a group called Solar United Neighbors. It's a nonprofit org that's aimed at building an energy system with rooftop solar as the cornerstone. They have a program that brings people together into these co-ops. That's where there's like 30 to 100 neighbors. They get together. They use their combined buying power to set up a local solar utility. Now, sometimes this is challenging. This is the other thing that people have to grapple with, is that there are barriers to doing this legally sometimes. There are issues just in terms of dealing with like state regulations. But it's a fight worth having. I have to say,
you got to talk to your neighbor too.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. But, when you buy together in a collective, you're saving money, you get a better deal.
I'll talk to my neighbor if I save money.
There are other things that are happening on this level, like a group that we've known for a long time, Co-op Power New England. They actually train people in a lot of low-income communities to be the technicians and installers for systems. They have a co-op where they're not trying to get a bunch of profit coming out of this, but they're all collectively benefit as investors in this thing. Here locally, there's an Oregon one where, because we couldn't get solar panels ourselves, my wife and I invested a little bit in a solar co-op that was doing this around the state of Oregon, and we got a very tiny return on investment. But it was something where, for us, the return was not just the money, right? It was about helping deploy some of this stuff.
Yeah, and they find cool places to do it, like on the roofs of schools and churches. And
right, exactly.
Like that.
And there's a group, Seeds for the Soul, which is local, and they've worked with Habitat for Humanity to try to get solar for lower income families. There's a group called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They have a community solar program, a lot of helpful resources on their website. So there's a lot that's actually happening in this space, I think, that people can get involved with. Again, if it's done at an appropriate
Smaller, local, less complex.
Yeah.
You know a lot. That's what happens when you're head of an organization like PCI. So much stuff comes across that you look at and see all the good things going on.
That's why I never respond to your emails.
I get it. 2,000 Watt Society is another thing to look into. Helps reduce energy demand in an equitable way. Have sufficiency as their kind of push. The average amount of watts in the US per person is 12,000. And that's about power. That's how much power that you are using exosomatically outside of your body through what our civilization is like supplying you. How do we get that down to 2,000 per person, eventually 500? That's what the 2,000 Watt Society group is about. So looking at them and would be interesting also.
And who's the guy you mentioned in our last podcast? You talked about the solar farm thing.
Living Energy Farm.
Yeah, Living Energy Farm.
What was he living on?
Those guys were down to 3% in terms of household electricity of the standard US. So, and that guy explains the technology and how they go about redesigning things. So pretty neat what you can actually accomplish.
But I think that idea of a 2,000 watt society, I mean, we don't operate that way at all. Everybody's operating based on money, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what can I afford? What can I spend? So if we could somehow get energy to be as important in decision making, that would be incredible. Like, that would really calm things down. I think on that front, in terms of calming things down and conserving and reducing in your own life, we like to plug our friends' work. The climate scientist Peter Kalmus has been on Crazy Town a few times, and he's got a guide for how to slim your footprint. It's in an award-winning book called Being the Change, Live Well, and Spark a Climate Revolution. And it's a cool book because it's not just like a technical how-to. It's also a philosophical book about how do you change your mindset.
Yeah, and I think the other way that folks can get involved that I think is helpful, again, is if we're thinking about trying to address the climate crisis, and it's not just about substituting where we get our energy or electricity from, but it's looking at other types of solutions or interventions. There's protecting land, biodiversity conservation, but conserving lands that help sequester carbon, for example. And a lot of that land is actually in the hands of indigenous communities from around the world, something like 80%. Some of the groups that you can support are ones at the front line, indigenous communities that have long been doing this work of stewarding these lands. So there are groups like the Surge Coalition that's actually focusing on the renewable energy transition itself and how to ensure the rights of indigenous communities in the push for these critical minerals. But there are other groups like Home Planet Fund that are working directly with indigenous communities on climate solutions that are much more nature-centric and community-focused, practicing the values of sustainability that are really key.
God, I'm learning a lot from you.
Yeah.
Well, I think
maybe you'll listen to me for a change. The only time you listen to me is when we do this podcast.
I think I will, actually.
Oh, okay.
I think that kind of giving is really important, but probably before you can get to any of this, the giving or changing stuff at your house or working in your community, you got to probably work on yourself. I know for me, this has been a real struggle to actually face reality and understand that there's no magic techno solution that's just going to solve all of this overshoot predicament that we're in. So I think the idea is that we've got to figure out how to live as much as we can the way that people evolved on this planet to live. And that means the energy comes from current solar flows from the sun. And it means, where you can, use your body as the source of energy and enjoy the ride. So, as Arnold would say, normally he'd say like, get to the chopper. Correct. But we're going to change that. It's going to be, get to the bicycle, get to the unicycle, get to the walking shoes.
Or get to the rollerblades.
Was that any good?
That was pretty bad.
Darn it.
We love hearing from listeners who are doing good work out there in the world, and we hope that maybe you'll find some inspiration in examples like this one. So Danya Shahid is a bright young woman who got in touch with us here at the Post Carbon Institute and wanted to help, and she provided really high-quality research for this episode. And I've been amazed by talented folks like Danya who have helped us deliver the messages we're trying to get out there. Longtime listeners might also remember how we had research help from Ilana Zuber for seasons 3 through 5. I've found that working with Danya and Ilana and others to be inspiring, and also shout outs to Alex Leff and Jen Leask and Taylor Antal. If you want to follow their lead, then I would hope you could find an organization that resonates with you and lend your talents and skills to help them with their work. And please let us know if you're doing something in service of people in the planet. Leave a comment in your podcast app or get in touch with us directly by emailing crazytown@postcarbon.org. That's crazytown@postcarbon.org.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Crazy Town. Da, 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 crazy town.